Okay.
And just to begin, if you just tell me your name and where you live and the kind of world that you live in and the kind of stuff that you do.
Well, my name is Art Adams. I'm a director of photography. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. I actually currently live in San Jose. And most of what I do is, at the moment, corporate marketing pieces, but I also shoot, I'm trying to shoot more spots. Kind of gave up on the feature world a little while ago, although it keeps trying to pull me back in. I spent 10 years in LA, went to film school, and then worked as a camera assistant in film, and sort of moved up fairly quickly. And just decided I didn't like the atmosphere in LA, so I came to the Bay Area. And it was funny, when I moved here, I thought, oh, I'm never going to shoot film again. I'm going to be stuck with all this low-end video, you know, I hated video. And it turns out to be the best thing that ever happened to me, because we have a very strong culture here where there's always a video engineer on the set, and most of the sound people are actually video engineers as well. So even if I'm going out to shoot a talking head interview, you know, back in my early days, you know, there's always, the sound person would be painting the camera. Well, that's interesting. So I didn't even know you could do that. So I'd lean over and I'd look, you know, over their shoulder at the waveform, the vector scope, and, you know, what are you doing? And tell me what's going on. And it was interesting because, and to this day, I still find this is true. I'm constantly amazed at how much I don't know and how much I don't know. Because there's always some sort of surprise. There's always a way to go deeper into the technology. And, you know, this was a whole new world of being able to control cameras and understanding how they worked. So when HD came along, originally we thought, well, what's this mysterious HD thing? And then I did my first HD shoot, which is just a tabletop shoot. I got together with a director and my regular video engineer, and we just put together a couple of tables and a small blue screen stage, and we covered them with tablecloths, and we hung stuff, and we put antiques on it, and we basically created a little environment like somebody had just been looking through a photo album of old pictures and, you know, postcards, and had gotten up and gone to get some tea. And we just did nice little moves, and we played around, and we got into the menus of the camera, and we realized, well, this is video. I know this stuff. It turned out to be more important to know all the ways you could screw it up when it got to post. You know, and that was really where all the gotchas were. But as far as actually exposing it and shooting it, at that point, it was still, that was with an F900, it was still fairly like video. Now it's completely, it's changing.
When you used that F900, was it still, what ASA roughly was it working at, I think?
ASA. You know, I've always had a problem with ASA and video cameras and HD cameras.
Yeah.
With the RED, it's very handy because you have to use, you probably have heard about the RED, it's in a museum somewhere near you. The RED is very different because the monitoring is at the moment so poor that you don't actually know what you're getting. And what you see is totally different from what you get. I mean, you look at the monitoring and you go, oh, that's really awful. And you get it on a computer and you look at it, oh, that's great, that's fine, no problem.
I mean, what's in my question here?
Okay.
This is where it gets real. You've already touched like 4 of the most serious issues I've got that I need to explore just by saying stuff like, you know, it's video, it's not film, or stuff like that. You're in, and then the RED, and me asking what ASA something is. I mean, the reason I asked that was that when I first I came to the States in 2000. I'd come across in 92 the old 1259 analog HD system that Philips had made that got battered when NHK pushed the 1080. And it was a cracking picture, I have to say.
I've never heard of it.
But the thing was when I got over here in 2000 and shot with the 900, it was about 100 ASA. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that after the Digibeta, and we'd been up to like 600 ASA or whatever, we're suddenly way back down there. I find myself out in a snowfield in Connecticut, ringing Japan and Italy and saying, I can't believe what's happened. And an engineer was telling me, but basically they'd frigged a Digibeta camera to get it, put all of the speed into resolution, and that's what was going on. So now that starts touching on this big bad issue. And we're right at the deep end of exposure and video, and exposure of film, and exposure of electronic cinematography. I mean, what's your current thinking around, you mentioned the difference between a camera like the Red and a camera like the 900. What would be your take at the moment about how you're thinking about all this stuff?
Well, okay, let me go back to, okay, so in film, I think of film as, film requires a very light touch. You know, I describe it to people like, if I'm going to create an image on film, I'm going to take a stamp and a piece of paper, and I'm going to go, and then there's the picture, and it's beautiful. With HD, at least 8-bit HD, like HD Cam, it's a piece of metal and a hammer. You have to hit it a lot harder to get a similar result. With film, I was at a point where I could light something by eye, and then using my spot meter, I could find a couple tones and say, well, I know the zone system, the Ansel-Adams zone system. I can place those values where I want them, and I will know, based on, you know, a basic knowledge of film stocks, where those are going to fall. And, you know, at the time we were still printing film, which doesn't happen, I mean, it doesn't happen the same way anymore, but I was getting really accurate results. And then when it came to video, I've never really been able to really assign an ASA or an EI or whatever it is to a video camera, because there's so many variables. You know, where's the gamma set? What's going on with you know, the knee, you know, compression. I use a meter when shooting HD mainly to match things, and I'll just dial up something arbitrary. There's a formula I learned a long time ago. 100 ASA at 2.8 is 100 foot candles. And then I translated that because I have a 400 ASA eye. I always seem to light to 2.8 at 400 ASA, so it's 25 foot candles. So I'll put my meter at 400, and I'll, I'll look, oh, I got a 2, I know how much light that is, I got a 2.8, and I can match things. But I really just ended up relying on the waveform and the vectorscope. I really learned how to watch those and dial in my exposure. And now we're back to the Red, where you can't use a waveform or vectorscope. You have a histogram that sort of gives you an idea of what's going on.
Would you explain to me and to them the why I can't use about it?
Oh, with the Red?
Yeah.
The output is Rec 709, in theory. If you look at it on a waveform monitor, if you put a gray card at 50 units, and then you pull it into Red Cine or Red Alert, it looks like it's a stop darker than it should be. If you pull it in using Red Log, it looks like it's a stop brighter, roughly. And this is just applying different gamma curves to the same thing. Now, I know people who have said that they try to rate it at 160, but to me, the camera really has no headroom. It's got 3 stops about overexposed with build 15, and then you're done. 3.5 stops maybe. And it depends on saturation too, because if the object gets more saturated, then that color is going to clip before the others. So you don't really have any way other than your meter, and I think your eye and the histogram, and you have to sort of use them all together. I found myself doing some tests where I used my meter to read something and then double check to make sure that the object wasn't so saturated that it was clipping, and then if it was, I had to back it down a little bit. But you know, the monitoring just, it seems to be doing something completely different from what the camera's doing. The camera I used yesterday seemed to have some sort of matrix issue where the colors were just shooting off in different directions. You know, flesh tone looked reasonably normal, but if the person we were photographing stuck out their tongue, it was purple, and their teal jacket turned blue, and it really made me want to just turn the color off, because when you get it into the computer, it looks fine. As long as you don't clip anything, it's pretty much fine.
Where does this put, with somebody that's been spent 20 years looking at images, thinking about stops, thinking about even having an ND in there and having to lose a stop, simple little calculations that you do all the time, polarizing filter, whatever the hell. And the fact that we come from a world where if you made a judgment about underexposure, that might affect the look, which is cool because it's something to play with. What do you feel about the people that are this Red has been made available to people who really haven't got a clue? I mean, what do you feel about the world that this camera's entering.
Something I've noticed is that you can make just as much or more money writing about how to break into Hollywood than actually breaking into Hollywood. And I think that's what Red has caught on to. They came out with this camera and they said, okay, this camera is going to equalize the playing field for everybody because you will have a camera that the pros, you know, will be envious of. And they really sold it hard. The problem is that at the end of the day, it is still a $17,500 camera. It's got a 4K sensor, but there's a lot of other stuff in there that has been done to make it more economical. So I saw a Sony F23 demo the other day that made my jaw drop. The only thing I hated about it is it still has a prism block in it, and it's a 2/3 inch sensor. But other than that, it's a stunning image.
Talk to me, tell me why, because okay, we're in the HD province,
Uh-huh.
and the world we come from is either NTSC or PAL, where we're basically just doing a rough sketch of whatever the hell's out there, but suddenly you see an image from the F23 which is jaw-dropping. Talk to me about why it's jaw-dropping. What's happening in the image that's...
The lighting setup that I went to a demo, a company called Flaxton in San Francisco set up on a stage because they bought the first F23 and possibly the only F23 in town, and they wanted to show it off. And so they set up a nice setting with an artist working at an easel painting, and there was, you know, some nice furniture in the background and quite a nice lighting job. And the gentleman who was painting, one of the lighting setups was a light just directly overhead coming straight down, hitting the paper he's working on and coming back up on him. And traditionally, either this, you know, this is going to blow out getting hit by the hard light before this has any effect, or you go for this and you lose that. And this is holding both of them. Really nice. The other thing we noticed was that they described the prism as a broadband prism. Instead of, so typically, and this is something I've experienced with the Red, which is very interesting. Typically, my understanding is with a prism, you've got red, green, blue. They don't really overlap and there's gaps in there, which is one of the reasons why film will see a fluorescent bulb as spiking green, whereas a video or HD camera won't, because the green is falling somewhere where it can't really see it. And that's, I don't know if I'm just making that up, but that seems to make sense, because video cameras just don't see the green spike as much. The Red sees it in a big way, which is really interesting. I don't know why, but it's very much more like film that way. And the F23 would see it similarly. And apparently this broadband prism technology, where basically the colors overlap. So instead of just red, green, and blue, you have red, green, and blue. And there's some blending in there so that you can get to the secondaries more easily. You know, the colors in between read much better, which has always been the weakness so far. And apparently a friend of mine was walking around at NAB asking people about this, and he said the response he got was, oh yeah, the technology's been available for 20 years, but it's never been needed. You know, nobody ever said NTSC needs to look that good. There's always been the spec. The spec has been fine. No one's gone outside the box until digital cinema. Now we need that, you know, that enhanced color space for digital projection. So finally, someone said, okay, well, we can do this. Let's actually make it.
I mean, it's been electronic cinematography, whatever that is. I mean, I saw a camera years ago called the EC35. Come across that?
I've never seen, I don't know that I've seen footage from it, but I remember reading about it at the time and thinking, that's a great idea.
Yeah, it just had a Sony, standard Sony inside the box. But
Was it Sony or Ikegami?
It was a Sony. It was a Sony. Now, what the hell was the number? Oh, I see what you mean. The EC35. Okay.
I think that was there was a Sony had the Panacam with Panavision, which was another one.
Yes. But the point, whatever it was, the point was it had a standard bit of guts in there and some Mickey Mouse ears to get all the film boys excited.
Yes.
But what I guess is of interest is that for me right now, I'm trying to work out where the apex of the change has been, because they've been threatening for a few years, and it seems to be with the advent of the Red. I mean, the Dulce's there and all the rest of it, and the Arri D21's coming on, and all of that stuff. We seem to be at that moment where you've got to know what you're doing. Not only have you got to know what you're doing, But the guys that know what they're doing on film need to hold hands with the guys that know what they're doing on video, because if not. So what's the practice? You said in San Francisco there's always an engineer of some description on set. Do you want to talk about the relationship in terms of HD between, say, the film guys who know nothing and the video guys who know something and their DTs? Because there's got to be different relationships between the sets of people.
Yeah, you know, I don't know how other people work in LA. I know that a lot of there's a company that comes up every once in a while and shoots music videos for Walmart, and they occasionally hire me as an operator. And it's funny because they'll have 2 HDX 900s HD, 1 SDX 900 standard def. Standard def camera will do the close-up. HD cameras will do the wide shots. They match the cameras just by sticking a setup card between them, and all their monitors are different. They have one kind of LCD, they have a beat-up 9-inch CRT, they have another LCD over here. And I mean, I guess it works. They know the cameras well enough that they've been able to match them in post, and it's all fine. But that horrifies us here, because we know how critical it can be to match cameras and to look at them live and to switch back and forth and really, you know, get them looking pristine and matched. But in LA, they don't care. It's a very different mindset. It's basically, how cheap can you do it? It's good enough. Fine. And that's the approach that you see in a lot of low-budget features.
I'm kind of a bit gobsmacked by that description, actually.
But that's the way it always has worked. When I was in film, I mean, I remember as a film loader one time working on a low-budget feature, and the executive producer came in and said, "How much film do we shoot today?" And I said, "Oh, only about 1,500 feet." And he said, "Great, that stuff's expensive." I remember thinking, well, it's more expensive not to shoot it, but okay. LA companies tend to take a lot of shortcuts because it is so competitive there. If you can get away with something, then get away with it. And they can be very penny wise, pound foolish. But up here, it's more corporate money, and people are less strict with corporate money because it's company money. Let's just do it the right way. You know, video crews are basically consultants in a way. We'll pay them more money, we'll get a nice product.
But in terms of this mix of like the instructing video people to the incoming film people in LA.
The story I heard is a bunch of our local DITs who, I mean, they've been video engineers for a long time, very well versed. This is all second nature. They can paint a camera, they can match cameras, they know how they all work. Going down to LA and sitting in a room with a bunch of film guys who just don't know anything. I mean, literally, they know nothing. And they kept trying to equate it to film. And, you know, the instructor for the workshop would say, this was one of the Santa Fe workshops, the instructor would say, well, you always want to protect your highlights because once they clip, they're gone, no data, you can't get it back. So the film guys are going, okay, protect the highlights. So underexpose. Okay, how much do you underexpose by? No. You don't underexpose, you protect the highlights. Okay, like one stop? A stop and a half? How much is it? No. You just have to get it right. And that's the part they didn't quite understand. Yeah. You know, you have this limited range and you have to squeeze everything in there.
Right.
You don't have the latitude film does where you can just let something blow and, you know, it'll still look pretty.
So is it the same here as it is in the UK? Historically, the video types are not allowed near the big dramas because they know what they're doing.
Interesting.
Sorry, that was a bit of a... I shouldn't have said that, but there you go.
You know, I think the entire time I was in LA, I only saw a video engineer once. On a TV pilot I was working on, they had 2 cameras and they were matching them. And the guy was obviously out of his element because we're on a stage where you don't normally have... I mean, I think they're used to working in a studio where you have the cameras that are always there and you have the control room, and this guy was kind of making it up on the spot. But you know, that was kind of the beginning because, you know, now you have to build your little studio. You have to build your little DIT workstation, and it has to be mobile, and, you know.
We call them video villages in there.
Yes, video villages. I'm not sure what we call them. There's video villages typically where all the creatives are watching, and then the DIT is somewhere more serious. But
so that's that take down here. We've got a slightly different mix up in SF because you've got people who are real switched on to it. Hey, do you know about the New York scene at all? How that functions?
No, I don't.
Okay, that's okay. So we're talking West Coast America thinking.
Well, it's interesting because in LA for a long time, in LA basically you are whatever your business card says you are. And that's how you get the job. Now, whether you keep the job or not depends on how much you know. There was a real problem a couple of years ago where there weren't enough DITs to go around. And a lot of people who were saying they were because they were just desperate to get work, they'd show up on a set and they'd be fired by lunchtime. So they're very skittish there. I mean, per capita up here, we have, at the time, we had vastly more DITs, qualified DITs, in ratio to the number of jobs going on.
How do you understand the term DIT?
Digital imaging technician. It's
Right.
it's different here than it is there. That's
right. We call them data wranglers.
Data wranglers, yes, and that's probably more what. It depends. Here they really know how to paint the camera. They can go in, mess with the gamma. They know the gamma tables. They can massage the knee.
How does that work? I'm going to keep pushing you.
Sure.
How does that work with the raw stuff, where you're not painting?
I think someone still needs to be watching a big monitor so they can see focus. Someone needs to be watching some sort of instrumentation so the camera, what the camera is doing, at least for my comfort level. Now, I have to adapt to all sorts of different situations, so I'm going to learn how to take the red out and not clip anything. But my comfort level is to have someone, if I'm watching an image that's that big, that's going to end up being massive, I want someone who has an extra set of eyes, keeping an eye on, okay, maybe focus is a little dodgy, maybe those shadows over there are a little too dark because we're starting to see some noise. Oh, you clipped when you went past that thing right there. Do we really want to do that? There's issues with infrared with the current red sensors, and actually I'm discovering with a lot of sensors. And if you drop a bunch of ND in front of the lens really quick, it'd be nice to have someone watching the shadows for you. And my DIT is really a second set of eyes who is just watching that image. I'm thinking about the lighting, where the camera's going to go next, blocking, what's going to change, how do I have to be ready for things, where's the sun going to go? I mean, there's a lot of stuff I'm thinking about. The DIT is just watching the quality of the image, and with traditional cameras, massaging it up and down a little bit, because we'll talk about a look. And, he or she will call me over and say, I think we got a little problem here, that's clipping a little bit too much. What do you think of the gamma? The blacks are a little, cool. Do you want them more neutral?
I've done...
yeah. Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, when I've done some VFX stuff,
Uh-huh.
I find myself with a guy on the shoot that's determining some stuff because he's worried about, he's got some back-end stuff to do.
Is this the video, like the visual effects supervisor?
Yeah. Now, do you find, my question to push into the mix that you're talking about here, so there's you and there's your DT looking at stuff, but with the raw world, there's also this relationship to this colorist that's not the same as the old kind of colorist. So did I ever impinge on your space? Or?
The problem is, most of the stuff I work on never gets colored anymore. With HD in this market, we basically make it right on the set the way we want it, and then that's it. There are 2 colorists in town that I know of. Three colorists in town. And they get the very high-end work. I've had them do film stuff for me. I haven't had any HD go through them at all. And that's the thing with the red now, is you've got all these people with red cameras and this raw workflow, but who's going to make it look like something? Because these people aren't going to spend $600 an hour at a professional facility, but it is a real art form. I mean, that's what I'm learning myself. I've always worked with a good colorist, and now I'm trying to duplicate what they do, and it's really interesting. And yes, how do we communicate what we want to that person?
What do you feel about lookup tables and all that stuff?
We don't have lookup tables here yet. There are no lookup table. I mean, ILM might have. Actually, it's now Kerner Optics. ILM is basically all computers.
Talking, just for the future here.
Industrial Light and Magic, yes. Basically, George Lucas decided he wanted to do everything inside a computer. So he split. So his old facilities people convinced him to split off the physical side into Kerner Optics. So they actually work still with cameras and models. And then the other side of ILM is strictly building things in computers. Because they discovered sometimes it's just quicker to build a model and shoot it with a camera. So, but yes, they might have some I mean, I guess right now the big monitors, there's two that I know, the Cinetal and the eCinema displays. I did work with an eCinema display and a lookup table box, a Luther box. Yeah, exactly. And it worked fine. I'm looking forward to playing with Speed Grade by Iridas.
Iridas, yeah.
Yeah. Remember them?
Yeah.
Oh, so long ago?
Yeah, well, aren't they shacked up with, is it silicon imaging or something?
Yes. And I think that's a brilliant combination. The combination of having the coloring software built into the camera so that you can sit there on set, preferably with a monitor that is properly calibrated, and dial in a rough look and then send it off to post, and that metadata is stored, and as soon as it comes up, there it is. I mean, one of the things I used to run into in features, I shot second unit on a couple of features, and then I also worked as an assistant and operator. And what I noticed for myself and for the DPs I was working with was, whatever comes out of dailies is what is going to be seen through the entire post process, and producers and directors will fall in love with that look. And then when it finally comes time to put in the real look, they push back and they say, that's not really the way we've been seeing it all this time. And the same thing I think is with red. You can probably
so this metadata issue and the possible speed grade stuff is reminding me that the words coming up, Hazeltine.
Oh,
Remember
yes.
the old Hazeltine operators and stuff.
Yeah.
The relationship with them, if you're offset.
You could, I never got this deep into it. I probably would now if film was still really a going issue, but I discovered that I could, if I could get them to print my stuff right, if I shot a grayscale full screen and then backed off and put it quarter screen and showed them the lighting in the background to see it, so they could see all the contrast. And I was basically saying, here's what you set up to, and then see, it's okay. This is what I want. And but the Hazeltine, I mean, I worked with DPs who would go out and do tests, and they would call in printer lights. We'd make a stamp when I was a camera assistant, rubber stamp with the printer lights. Bam, that's it. Do that. And I mean, I just thought that was just amazing. But it was, you could really dial stuff in. I mean, you really had to know what you were doing, but you could lock in your dailies and know exactly what you were getting. I don't know how you do that now. I mean, without the metadata, for example, the red. I mean, the red is probably going to be here for a long time because everybody owns one and everyone is expected to use it. If the production company who's hiring you owns a red, that's pretty obvious that you're going to use it. Then the question is, okay, who's going to color grade it? And a lot of times the question or the response I get up here is, oh, we don't know. And then the other thing is, well, how do I describe to them what look I want? First of all, and second of all, will they care? Because they're not necessarily going to the people, and I don't know how this is going to shape up, but I don't think the people who have traditionally been grading film are necessarily going to be the same people who are going to be grading this stuff. And whereas the colorist and the DP in film have a relationship that's kind of understood, and if the colorist wants to work a lot, then they got to make the DP happy. I see there's a disconnect now.
We may not even have a grade existent who finishes, I don't know what else to call it, finishes the data. Yeah. Do you reckon? I mean, is that what we're talking about?
They sold, here's a camera that needs to be professionally color graded, and they sold it to people who can't afford to do it for the most part. And the products that are out now, Red Alert and Red Cine, are very scaled down. You can create pretty looks, but I don't think you can create consistent looks because they don't give you the tools to really do that.
Yeah.
And then the other solutions are, I guess there's one coming out, the Red Cine, or the Red Telecine, scaled down scratch version for $17,000. Okay, so now you're paying the price of the camera again to be able to properly color correct it. And then that assumes that you are actually competent and qualified to do that. And a lot of people aren't. And there's other solutions. There's speed grade.
What's your basic feeling? Because it's interesting talking around this. What's your basic? Have you a feeling in amongst all this? Is it an uncomfortable feeling about the space that we're in?
I try not to feel uncomfortable about it because there's nothing I can do. So I just want to leap in and figure out how to solve it. I don't know how to do that now. And part of the problem is most of my red shooting so far has been testing. Just testing the limits of it. Actually, tomorrow is my first official red shoot, self-financed, because I've decided my next demo reel is ready to go out, and I want to have red footage on it, because that seems to would be a huge advantage. But you know, I don't know what paths people are taking. I hear some of the higher end DPs who shoot nothing but spots in town, they're getting it professionally color graded. Great. But what about, you know, what about the corporate company that used to own a digital Betacam and now they own a red?
Yeah.
I don't know where that goes yet. Yeah. And I don't suspect that they're going to want, they've never had to pay for coloring before.
But it strikes me with this the cliff, and we've just jumped actually.
Yes.
There ain't no getting back on the cliff. Yes. So here we are with 4K, 6, whatever the hell. Mm-hmm. But this is our world now. And I have to say, from my I felt kind of trepidation before my first red shoot, but actually exhilaration after it, because something tells me that check this out. See what you feel about this. The issue of exposure in film was a case of having a latitude to play with, and when you took an f-stop or a t-stop or whatever wherever your head was at, you nailed your colours to the mast. Right. So you got back to the grade if you were lucky enough to have a grade, and you kind of got something out of it, which was cool, and it always blew me away because film always made everything beautiful. There's another issue altogether, making beautiful. What happened to me the other day was that I began to realise that the way that we used to manipulate film to get a look, like maybe heat the developer up a bit or bypass the bleach or whatever the hell, that possibility is completely there with the data once we start to put the words around it. At the moment it's just data. Right. But I can see a time, for myself, where we get to do that kind of stuff. We're just waiting for that to grow.
Yeah,
does that ring bells? Or?
Well, there's a huge learning curve right now because, I mean, right now here, there's several dozens of people easily who have bought reds. And there's a DP who retired and went into real estate in the 90s, hasn't shot, as far as I know, for 10 years, bought a red. Why not? It's cheap. Why not? Buy one. But I don't hear about a lot of people actually shooting them professionally. It's slowly ramping up. But there's such a learning curve that people are still a little bit afraid. They bought this great camera, but they don't know exactly what to do with it yet. I think there's going to be some pain initially. I think eventually we'll figure it out. And, the thing is, market forces, especially in Los Angeles, are always trying to cut costs. So, okay, we've cut costs by bringing in this really cheap camera that is capable potentially of some really great things. But then there's finishing software, then there's paying a colorist, and there's, and then this is added onto every project, whereas before, you made it look right on the set, everyone signed off, oh yeah, that's great, and it went through post. Now it's completely different. So I don't know what's going to happen. I think it's too early to tell. It all kind of depends on who you talk to, because some people will say, well, YouTube has destroyed all quality. And I have actually had a job once where I was told I had to make it look like amateur footage on YouTube, and I made it look too good, so I didn't get hired back. I think that's a passing phase. I think next year in the US, in theory, all the TV stations go digital. And I don't know if that means they're going HD or if it's just going to be digital standard def. But in theory, all the footage is going to look much better coming into the home. And in theory, people will notice.
Well, this is my next question. And you're right in this space. And that is this. There's us, with our Ks and our 4s and our 5s and all that stuff. And there's the average punter, as we call them, who's getting that. It's not happening in England, by the way. We are not really we're getting Sky Sports or something. We don't get HD into the home, not really. But you've got it. So what is it that's being sold to the average populace in terms of HD? What do you think they're being given?
The thing that always worries me when, for example, they advertise home theater systems and theaters, is they always talk about the sound. They never talk about the image quality. It's Dolby, whatever sound, it's surround, it's people, oh, it's surround, we want to go to that theater. Well, what about the image quality? One thing I've noticed is that recently we had a beautiful old Sony Trinitron set that actually Adam Wilt gave me. He moved and he didn't have room for it anymore. And it was beautiful. It was basically a low-end broadcast monitor. Had it for years. It was stunning. And then it finally died because it was 20 years old. And we went around and we thought, oh, we'll just get another CRT because we don't really trust what LCD is doing right now. And then we tried picking one up and said, no, we're going to get an LCD. Well, suddenly we had access to HD. And we started watching HD channels just because they were shot in HD. For certain things, if they were shot with a very high resolution camera, shot properly by someone who's trained and qualified, it's just jaw-dropping. It doesn't matter what it is, you just look at it and it's beautiful. It's like nothing we've seen come into our living room ever. But then we have cameras like this one that people are grasping and saying, well, this is HD. And they go out and they shoot the same thing. And they're much less qualified. The camera doesn't do the same thing. And there's a dramatic difference between what you can do with the higher end camera for, $60,000 versus what you can do with the $5,000 camera. And it worries me that a lot of people don't necessarily notice the difference when they're watching TV right now. And that concerns me, because then with this YouTube situation where people are accepting that, and of course there's a trend with feature films where you shoot them handheld and dramatic and you feel like you're in the moment. It starts to make me wonder, well, at what point does someone say, well, we got this raw data, do we really need to hire an expensive colorist, or we can rough something in? The lookup tables from our last movie, let's put them on this one, that looked pretty good. So I wonder if we're going to be going that direction, or if quality will actually become a factor again.
Have you seen much? I remember when I was doing some conferences around about 2002, one of the issues that was coming up, I have to say that about 60% of the footage that I was looking at was out of focus.
Ah, yes.
Now, on your TV, your HD TV, what's the ratio, or has that gone down now? I mean, what's the deal with the focus on HD, do you think?
I see a lot of HD shot with small cameras, and it's pretty hard to get that stuff out of focus. I think a lot of the HD I'm watching now is film shows transferred to HD, so usually there's a fair amount of quality there. I haven't noticed a ton of out of focus.
So not
stuff.
a big issue?
Not yet. I'm looking at the red and I'm getting worried. I mean, that's the other thing, is now you have, not only have you given a 4K camera to people at an affordable price, you've also introduced you've introduced the grading issue, but now there's the focus issue, because these people are used to taking a 1/3 or half inch or 2/3 inch chip camera with tons of depth of field. You almost can't get it out of focus. And now you've got a full-size sensor with a fairly expensive lens on it. I mean, a lot of people I know are buying Zeiss Ultra Primes to put on the red, because the red looks much better the better glass you put on it. But your focus is so much more critical now, and a lot of the people who bought these things are not considering that. They don't understand it. They never had to work with someone who pulls focus, but now you need someone to pull focus, because if I walk from over there to over there, and you're on an 85, you're not going to be able to do that.
There's also this little problem of using the 2K settings and losing half the picture.
Yes, I tested that. I tried that the other day too, because we wanted to shoot a high-speed test, and we got it up to 79 frames per second at 2K. And yeah, we went from this to that.
Yeah. Optics, simple old optics, really, with a tiny little bit of chip.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because if you think about the special effects people might actually like that, because it allows them to shoot with now a wider lens, and they have more in focus. I know that when ILM started working with, I think it was the F900s for the Star Wars movies, you can't shoot at 1 frame per second on a motion control rig with one of those cameras. So before they could use manageable light levels and just do long exposures, they ended up melting models trying to shoot at 24 frames per second on an HD camera. So yeah, the zoom in window thing is kind of interesting. I actually, when I see stuff like that, I think, well, okay, I can find a way to use that, I think.
Right.
So.
You want to tell me about that?
I spoke to David Stump a little while back, and he was talking about how much easier it was in the film days than it is now. something I firmly believe is true. He said, you know, back in the days of film, it wasn't rocket science. Now it's rocket science. And in a way, I'm glad that everyone in LA is thrashing about trying to figure this out, because by the time it gets up here, hopefully they'll have figured it out. But you know,
from what I hear, it's like San Francisco is more the 4K area than LA.
Even as far as red?
In as far as people are trying to have a good old thought about the process.
Oh yeah, people in LA just they grab it and they try to make it work. And up here, I think we've been just kind of thinking about it a little bit more.
Well, in terms of that comment about film and stuff, the one thing that was for sure about for me, for sure about film for me, was that I could light a shot, I could put a video camera up there, and I could put a film camera up there, and I would guarantee that the film camera would deliver a beautiful image, whereas the video image, I'd have to really work at it. Film lighting was always a lot easier than video lighting.
Ah, yes. I put that down to, I don't know what the proper term is. I call it, in my head, color resolution or color depth. Basically, the more bits you have dedicated to color, like you do in film, I mean, it's an analog format, you have a tremendous amount of color information. Things separate much easier. And I always think of lighting and composition in layers. You know, there's a background, there's, you know, your subject, there's layers in between. You're always trying to build the illusion of depth by trying to separate those layers. And in film, they separate much more easily because of the subtleties of, you know, subtle tones, subtle colors, things like that. And it's much easier in film to throw up one light. HD cam and DVC Pro HD 8-bit formats, they throw away so much color information. You don't get that. You have to edge light and backlight considerably more, or at least I do, in order to separate those elements.
Like the old black and white.
Yes. My experience is it goes to mud, which I guess is what black and white would do if you have, you know, a very similar tonal scale, you know, a narrow tonal scale in a shot. You have to pop things here and there to make them stand out, and it's the same thing for me in HD.
Okay.
It goes to it's a high, you know 1080p is such a high resolution format, but at the same time you're throwing away so much info that.
Let me just bring up an issue here too. There's a thing where sometimes I see this stuff occasionally. I saw it in Collateral. You're swimming along. I know, big trouble where I know.
Yeah, a lot of stuff.
You're swimming along. You're looking at something that looks vaguely cinematic. The suspension of disbelief is in full play. You're in the movie, and then suddenly a shot comes up and goes, "I'm video. I ain't film. No how, no way." What the hell is going on?
A couple of things. One thing they did was they had a couple of stunt scenes where they were running at 24 frames per second with the 1/24th shutter. So much more motion blur. The other thing I saw in that movie was, you know, anytime you have a prism, I don't know exactly why this is. I have theories, but nobody's been able to explain it. Actually, David Stump explained it on the cinematography mailing list in a way that made perfect sense. You know, you've got this prism, and green's getting most of the color, and then, you know, and then red, and then blue in diminishing amounts, because we see, I think someone had said it was 60% of our vision is green, you know, 30% is red, and 10 is blue. So you've got this prism in there, and when light focuses on the prism, what you have in focuses properly on all three prisms, but I don't think it focuses properly. The focus doesn't hold. Okay, so if I'm focused on an object, the light's focused on the prism, everything's fine, but the light in front and in back that's out of focus is not focused on the prism. And I think there's something going on with green, because if you look at Collateral and you look at the street lights, I think it's green on the top and magenta on the bottom where they're out of focus. And that's a classic artifact of a prism camera. And based on a bunch of lighting consulting I've been doing, I've been helping a company called Element Labs develop LED lighting for the motion picture industry. And there is no magenta wavelength, but we've been able to generate a digital plus and minus green gel in this LED light by increasing or subtracting green. So I think that's what's happening, is that for some reason on the top of this highlight, you know, you have excess green on the bottom, you have diminished green, which tells me that the green isn't focusing in the same place. It's a known problem with prism cameras. It's why I hate prism cameras.
Do you think it's just that? Because there's this, I had to put this, well, there's every so often there's like, you can have a sequence though, which has been shot all on the same camera, 10 shots, and there'll be one shot that's screamingly present. Somebody said that a film shot was a phone call it's a long distance telephone call, whereas a video call was from a video shot was from a call box around the corner. Now, for some reason, in the mix, in a stream of video or digital images, electronic cinematography images, you'd have the suspension of the disbelief, the kind of film thing, but one shot would stick out, even though it's shot on the same camera as the rest. Now, there's something else going on there.
Yes. Well, there's a lot of stuff going on. It's hard to say out of context. I mean, not if I saw a shot, I would be able to say. Is what I think. Yeah. But a lot of it is, highlights are still the huge weakness. How highlights are handled, and actually, from working with the Red, I've learned a lot about how other cameras handle highlights because the Red doesn't handle them at all. A lot of times the highlights are smooth and desaturated, and then there's a nice slope. In film, the slope is very, there's a much greater slope. There's much more there.
Are you saying it's kind of like, do you remember the old tube cameras where you had no chance?
Yes.
No chance at all. So you had to handle it big time.
Oh, yeah.
You saying it's a bit like that with the Red?
Yeah. It's funny because I remember aiming a lot of tube cameras at blank walls trying to get the burns out because you let them look at a highlight too long. The Red is, it's interesting. On build 14 with the Red, the camera was really balanced for daylight. If you shot a neutral gray card and, at a number of different exposures and then looked at the histogram, you'd see red, green, and blue all lined up in a big lump just marching towards overexposure. And then when you clipped, it clipped and it was a white clip and it was fine. Or it wasn't fine, but it wasn't really awful. Under tungsten light, you had blue down here, and then green, and then red, with the result being that as red marched up and red clipped, all the highlights then went cyan, which is it's anti-red. And until the others caught up, you would have this weird cyan cast. And it was like, that was a real education. I thought, wow, that's interesting. This happens on other cameras. What are they doing? Well, the video engineer says, that's the same thing. They're just desaturating it. So you don't see that transition. You still see the detail, but once you get up beyond a certain point, you're not really seeing color anyways. You're just looking at brightness and detail.
So you've got a red shoot coming up.
Yes.
And you've got an internal red shoot, which means tungsten. So what's your plan to deal with the different color balancing and stuff?
I know that I get 3 stops over in tungsten light. I am going to have a lot of warm wood. What I'm going to do is look at the histogram and be very careful because it's very subtle. I mean, the histogram in the display is, it's very small, and I want to make sure that last pixel never gets lit up. And if I can do that, I'll be fine. I actually have a couple of shots where I have a television set in the shot, and the television set is, of course, it has a white point of 6,500 Kelvin. So I really need to switch to daylight for that. So I will switch to daylight, and then I'll put an 85 in front of the camera, in front of the lens. So I'll keep it all consistent. Now, I was thinking for a while, well, wouldn't it be an interesting experiment to shoot portions under tungsten, portions under daylight, and then, try to color correct them? And then I realized, well, I'm really shooting this for my reel, so maybe not. But it was interesting because at one point in the creative process, the television set wasn't really going to be anything. Now it's the focus. So I have to make it.
Why do they always do that to you, eh?
And I don't know. It was interesting, but it's interesting. But I love problems like that. I love the fact that I'm shooting mostly tungsten, but I have this one setup where I have to do daylight. Well, how do I do it? How do I match it? Oh, I'll light it with daylight, drop a filter in, fine.
So this kind of this moment in time, this moment where we've been travelling up here and we've hit this kind of 4K thing, and the data and the raw and all of that stuff. Though there's quite a lot of not worry or trepidation, there's due diligence to the moment. Yeah?
I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity for the people who can figure this stuff out. And I think, I mean, we're always, as cinematographers, we're always looking at what are the strengths of a system, what are the weaknesses of a system, and how do we play to those. For a long time, when I first started shooting HD, I used to tell people, HD cameras are like film stocks. You have to choose the right one for the job. If you're projecting it, you need 1080, get the Sony F900. If we're just going to NTSC, well, the Verbatim is very beautiful colorimetry. Let's use that. What look do you want if you're really poppy, zingy colors? Sony's great if you want something more subtle. Panasonic. I'm not sure where I was going with that. But I mean, now
it's about the enthusiasts.
It's working to the system, picking the right system for the job. That's the thing that worries me a little bit about the Red, is that it is, I'm calling it the world's greatest pinhole camera. Because you can make marvelous pictures with a pinhole camera as long as you use it the right way. And it's the same thing with the Red. I think if you use it for the right stuff, and you're aware of its limitations, it's going to look phenomenal. If you don't know how to do that, you can have some really, there's times when you want to use the F23 instead. And there's things you sacrifice. You sacrifice the depth of field, but you gain dynamic range. The F23 has easily 11 stops. The Red has 7, maybe.
The picture I'm getting from you is like, if you take some putty and you put it in your hand and you do that, it's going to squeeze out something somewhere.
Yes. There's always a weakness. Always a weakness. And the thing is, with the Red, it's exaggerated, because if you look at all the cameras that have come out so far, they've all had, there's always a problem. There's always an issue. There's always something you don't expect, something the manufacturer won't tell you about that you'll find out on your own. They'll deny it. Other people will confirm it. And then you have to figure out how to work your way around it. This is more, there's more of this going on with the Red than I've ever seen with any other camera. Probably because the Red in its current form is an alpha version. They built up, the marketing was amazing for this camera. Everybody wanted one. People were putting down $1,000 deposits, 2 years in advance, so they could get the one piece of their camera that had their serial number on it. And then when their chance came, they would mail that in and get their camera back with that built in, and that was their serial number. It's just amazing stuff. And
what do you think?
I'm trying to think of where I was going, because I got caught up in the marketing, which is what so many people do with this camera. It was really oversold, and they said they were going to release it at a certain time and certain date, and they did. The problem is they released it to people who were just chomping at the bit to get their hands on this camera and take it out and shoot it, but they released a camera that wasn't ready. Now, Sony has never done that. Panasonic has never done that. Ikegami's never done that. From what I'm told, Sony will send out alpha or beta units. People will test them, and then when they're done, they send them back and they put them in a big grinder and they destroy them. You never see those cameras again. Red sent these things out, and people were losing, sunset shots because the camera locked up. There was, over here at Stanford University, one of the early cameras was shooting a documentary about the university, and they were shooting a football game, and there's a shot where all the players are coming up through the hallway onto the field, and the camera starts on them and then pulls up and turns around and reveals, a coliseum full of screaming fans. And it's one of those once-in-a-lifetime shots. I don't know how they talked anyone into letting them do that. It would have been phenomenal, except the camera froze halfway through, and they lost it. And I know Jeff Boyle lost some shots initially on Dark Country. So they released an alpha, and now we're all part of the development process. I firmly believe that things that some of us are writing about very publicly that we have found that are flaws in the camera are slowly being fixed. Yeah. Because Build 16 was supposed to be where all the image problems got fixed. But Build 15 came out and solved easily half of them. They didn't say anything about it. They're not telling you. They just aren't talking about it. The infrared issue with the chip became a big issue recently. And the filter manufacturers love it because they're running out and making filters left and right. Red has basically said, no, we're not going to do anything about it. You know, that's just what the camera is. So it's interesting, and this camera has been released into the world, and it's not anywhere near ready for prime time. And those of us who are really looking at it are finding a lot of stuff wrong with it. Other people are just sort of stepping off a cliff. You know, I related the story of the guy who sent me an email one day and said, I just opened up my Red, it just arrived, and it's booked with me on a shoot in Texas tomorrow with a crew I've never worked with before. What do I need to know? Wow.
Don't go.
Yeah, it's amazing that you would trust something that, I mean, I might risk that with a Sony or a Panasonic because I know the process they've gone through, but with a camera that nobody knows anything about. I mean, we are literally writing our own manuals on this thing. And it's great in a way because now I learn about what all the other cameras are doing that I never learned to look at before. And I'm becoming much more critical with things I never thought I'd look at before. I've always been a big fan of looking at bokeh. You know, bokeh, the out of focus quality of a highlight. And I first noticed it with anamorphic lenses in film. You know, you get the nice big ovals out of focus and, you know, really beautiful stuff. And then certain lenses have certain clusters of leaves in the aperture. So by looking at out of focus highlights, I can go, oh, that's a Cooke S4. I know what a lens that is. Okay, now I can learn from this process. Oh, that's an ultra prime. That's a super speed. I know what these are. And I really can understand what I'm looking at. Well, now I'm looking at those with chips. And I just went and looked at the F35 at NAB. And I mean, basically, it's the Panavision Genesis chip, because it's a Sony product that they developed with Panavision. Now it's in a Sony camera. I'd never really seen one before, and I knew that the sensor has stripes down it. You know, instead of a bare pattern where you have 2 greens for every red or blue, or the prism, the pixels are actually laid out in stripes. So you have red stripe, green stripe, blue stripe, and then in post you just basically shift the lines over on top of each other. And I looked at the highlights. I mean, the first thing you do at anytime you see a new camera is you pan it over and you look at the highlight and see what happens. And it was interesting because it had these very nice vertical flares, which I believe is some sort of crosstalk going down the stripe. And it's kind of like an old IT chip, except the IT chip, you'd aim it into the sun and you'd get a big old line just right through. And this was a very soft flare. It was kind of interesting. It kind of looked like anamorphic flare, except rotated. And then if you look at the center of the highlight, there's a little bit of a stripe in the center of the highlight too. And so it's really interesting to go into this thinking, okay, I know something about the chip. Here's evidence of what it's doing. Or to learn about a chip from a manufacturer's spec and then go in and look at it and look for what the characteristics of that chip are just by kind of thinking about it and going, well, okay, it's laid out in stripes. I see striped flares. It has something to do with that. It's something to keep in mind. It's a different look. It's a flaw or it's an advantage. And I think every camera that starts coming out from now on that has any sort of new technology is going to have something like that we have to discover, and that we can either take advantage of, or we can say, I'm not so happy about that. But it's not like film stocks where you have contrast and color rendition. It's all these other little technological things that are going on from the chip through the analog to digital converter to what happens when is it coming out compressed? Is it getting recorded raw? All these factor into the look. And you have to know all that stuff in order to control the look. And I just wrote an article about filtration, and I was talking to Bob Zupka of Snyder Optics about filtration. And he was saying the same thing. He said basically any camera you use, there's different sensor sizes, there's different processing, it's getting laid off as data in a different way, and that all affects what filter you put in front of the lens.
So in terms of where we've got to, there's this character called the director of photography that sits in a landscape, a terrain, an ever-changing terrain, in fact seismically changing at this point in time. And the way that you've talked up until now is about being present in this terrain and trying to have some control. Would control be the right thing?
Oh, yes.
So bearing in mind the future and how it ain't going to stop coming at us, what's your strategy?
My strategy is to be on the forefront. I think that One of the reasons I'm shooting this red thing that I'm going to shoot tomorrow and why I'm funding it myself is because I want to have a red piece of red footage on my reel. Because a lot of people have reds, but they aren't necessarily using them yet. People are slowly stepping into the red arena because they don't really know the post flow. They don't know, well, I'm just going to figure it out. I'm going to make it work. And when people see this on my reel, they're going to go, this guy knows the red. And that's my plan going forward, is to be on the forefront of learning. When a new technology comes out, I want to be one of the first to wrap my brain around it. And that
it's going to get logarithmically much harder, it seems to me, as time goes on.
Yes, and I try to play a delicate balance between raw technical knowledge and intuition, because I don't want to know how to build a camera. I just want to know how how it's made affects the image.
What's the sense? Okay, in terms of high definition, generally, even the idea of high, like got a little ladybird there.
I have a wasp actually.
Oh, okay. I've got a wasp.
Guess I'll just see what happens.
In terms of even the naming of it, high, elite, definition. You know, there's a whole marketing trip around this stuff. But there we are at present in this terrain with technology coming at us. But the most important thing that I can kind of hear you say in terms of what resonates with me is the intuition. Because somehow, what is your intuition telling you?
Oh, about the technology going forward?
About being present as a person who's working at the place where images get defined in some kind of way. What's your intuition telling you?
I'm hoping that I have a place in the future. I'm hoping that the cameras don't become so good that they don't necessarily think they need DPs anymore. And that's what we've always been worried about for a long time is, cameras get smaller, cameras get better. At what point will people say, well, this makes a good enough picture, what do we need you for? My theory has been that as a DP, people hire me for my taste. I am the guardian of good taste. I have to find out what taste level we're working to, and then bring my sensibility to that. That's why people hire me. They look at my work and they say, that's nice looking stuff. I want him to create something like that for me, using a crew or a small crew, a big camera, small camera, whatever. I think the taste translates. It's a matter of finding out what the equipment will do so that you can translate your taste into the image. It's just, we're just learning different palettes. Here's we've traditionally been working with a palette that's maybe 5 or 6 paints on it. Well, high definition now gives us a bigger palette, and at some point we're going to have an even bigger palette. And how do we take what we used to know and bring that forward to whatever the next generation is? And in theory, the cameras are going to get easier and easier to use. I mean, right now the cameras are getting much better, but as they get better, there are also more issues that can bite you later, and we're still figuring all that out. Hopefully, I'm not sure that I'm going in the right place with this.
I think it's a really good place.
Oh, okay.
But I think you've hit it.
Okay.
I think that the world we exist in is an unsure world at the moment, and our goal is to be able to upsell.
As an upsell, yes. Yes, I mean, basically, you always have to be on the cutting edge if you want to be current, if you want to be working. And after a while, you'll get a reputation as being the person who knows all that stuff. The problem is there is so much stuff to know because there's so many different solutions and so few standards. It's like the big argument with HD when everyone's trying all these different HD formats is, which way do we go? What's the standard? We still don't have a standard. And in theory, the US is switching over to HD next year. What's the standard? Nobody knows.
Some of us got into this game because images excited us, and we sort of learned. I mean, I was always stunned when somebody paid me to look for a camera. That was blew me away completely.
Yes.
But I used to look for a camera on the basis that they paid me for my intuitive grasp of how to obtain an image.
Right.
But we might be in a different landscape now. I don't know. What do you feel about that?
I think what's happening now is the director of photography has to be more of a technical director. Now, for example, in the video world, you've always had this separation I'm talking mainly about like live event and sitcom, where you have the camera crew, and you have the lighting crew, and you'll have a lighting director who lights it, and then you have the camera crew with the technical director, who then massages the image. It's always been very, very separate. The cinematographer has served both roles back when film was more of a mechanical and chemical medium. And then in the video world, it's been separate because you have this very intricate technological side where you have to make sure all the cameras are matched, and you're writing levels because you go from one side of the set to the other, and maybe the lighting changes or something like that. And everything has to be connected through switchers, and everything has to be clocked together and all that. And now you have the DP who used to just have to know this mechanical chemical process, having to learn all this other stuff as well, and know the post workflow, because people will come to the DP and say, well, so what do we do with this footage once it's done? And you kind of have to tell them. I mean, there's a lot of people I run into who, it's kind of like people who make feature films and then don't know what they're going to do with them. They always think about the distribution last, when in really you should think about the distribution first, because that's how you're going to make money off of all the money you just spent. Well, you've shot all this footage. Now what do you do with it? And the DP, a lot of times, will have to know something about that, because a lot of these people won't necessarily, they'll be grading dailies, happily. Oh yes, dailies look wonderful. And at some point they'll start cutting them. Well, then what? How do you cut them in such a way that then you can do a film out? I mean, there's a lot of steps in that process.
But you struck me as a person that in the end, I feel a similar thing. I don't know you, but I feel this thing, which is that somewhere deep down, you believe in the power of your own intuition and judgment to actually swing you through this particular terrain that we're in.
I think so. I mean, the one thing that got me into doing this in the first place was composition. I was, as a 12-year-old, I was very struck by different kinds of composition in the television shows I watched, and I always wanted to be a camera operator because I wanted to frame things. And so far, that's the one thing we still kind of have. I'm not sure that this will always last. I mean, you've got if you have a 4K imager and you're only delivering 2K to a film out, well, okay, there's a certain amount of reframing that can be done. I don't know that people are really doing that yet, which is a good thing. But yeah, I do like to think that I have a certain amount of control going through. Now, I'm reasonably flexible. I know there's a lot of people who really have a really solid grip on what they want. They say, I am the cinematographer, I am the author of the image, and they really pursue that. I tend to be more collaborative. I tend to work with people on my crew who I want to participate creatively, because I'm thinking about this and they're thinking about that. And they're going to be thinking harder about that than I am. So if my gaffer comes up to me and says, hey, I did this gag last week where we did something like that, that might work here. Oh yeah, that works. And that's where I'm the arbiter of taste. I can say, yes, that works. No, that doesn't work. And I can collect what a crew is going to, can contribute, and focus that into a channel that has been predetermined by myself and the director. The trick is now doing that in post, because now, whereas I've just had to do that on the set and then make sure that they print it the right way later, well, now there's so many options. How do I communicate that and what I'm going for, and still be open to the possibility that a colorist down the line is going to do something much better than I expected? And I kind of expect that too, because I can jump on a laptop or go home and finesse an image and go, yeah, it's pretty nice. But a professional colorist is going to take that to another level. I'm excited about that. I like that. I like the fact that we're coming back to a point where there is another stage to the finishing process. It's not just, let's just get it right on the set, which is what I've been working with HD and video for so long. It's nice to have a return to the option of, here's another set of eyes with another talent that is hopefully as well developed as my talents are, bringing it to another level. I very much believe in this whole process as being collaborative. I do also believe that we are the closest civilian version of the military that you can get. I mean, this industry is very efficient and very focused, and there's a chain of command. And if everyone's contributing at once, you'll never get anything done. And there's the director, there's the DP, the production designer, you know, I mean, there's a definite chain of command, and you have to maintain that. But we're all in this industry because we want to contribute. We want to do creative things. And to me, all these crafts build upon each other. I was working on I got called in one day to operate B camera on a TV series. And the A camera operator got home sick. B camera operator moved to the A camera. I came in on B camera. And the camera was, first thing up was a stunt. And I was looking at the shot as had been described to me. And I was thinking, you know, I think the shot is better 10 feet to the left. So I go over to the DP and I say, you know, I've only been here 20 minutes, but I'd like to move my camera. Do you mind? So I show him, okay, yeah, great. We move it over. And the shot turned out better. And I went up later and I said, I hope you don't mind me just jumping in, you know, the new guy, and saying that. He said, you know, the more ideas you have, the fewer ideas I have to have. And things have become so complex now that I don't think one person can hold on. I mean, it's true of all production. You know, you have on a feature or a spot, you can have 40, 60, 80, 150 people all coming together 20, 30, 40 times a day to make one shot happen. And one person can't keep that in their head. You have all these crafts coming together to make it better. And I think this raw revolution could, or uncompressed, because we only have a couple raw cameras, but we have a lot of uncompressed cameras that are still doing some processing. But they open up the possibility of doing great things farther down the line. We're not just shooting Polaroids anymore. This picture is what you walk away with. We're shooting raw data with an intent to do something to it later. And we've done our best here, and all these craftspeople have come together here, and hopefully all these craftspeople will come together over here and take it to an even higher level. I mean, it's amazing what a professional colorist can do. My only worry is that costs money. That's another person you have to pay, because great talent deserves to be compensated. And not everyone believes that yet, and especially with the red. People didn't buy reds to pay great colorists, you know, hundreds of dollars an hour to do great work. They bought them because they were cheap cameras. They were going to put them in league with the Hollywood the big Hollywood studios. And it's not that simple. So I'm not sure when that disconnect is going to be, you know, when that's going to be solved, when that's going to be fixed, when people are going to realize, you know, yes, I bought this cheap camera. No, I'm not going to get off that easily. I still have to have, you know, I still have to hire craftspeople to work this. I can't just take out my little, this isn't the same as my little camera that I take out and I shoot stuff with, and it's good enough. You know, you're going to take this camera out, the red, and it's either going to be phenomenal or it's going to suck. And there's going to be very little in between. And people have to recognize that and then get the right people behind them. So,
on that note, I'd like to thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I hope that was worthwhile.